The phone rang just after sunrise when the Georgia air still carried the chill of night. I was standing by my kitchen window, stirring my coffee when I heard the voice on the other end. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris," the woman said cheerfully, like she was confirming a dentist appointment. "We're calling to verify the deed transfer on your property before funds are released." My hand froze around the spoon. "I'm sorry, the what?" I asked. "The deed transfer," she repeated. "Your son, Marcus Harris, submitted the seller's authorization last week. The closing is scheduled for Friday." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The walls around me seemed to bend the morning light, turning sharp metallic. "That must be a mistake," I said quietly. "I haven't agreed to sell my home." The woman hesitated. Papers rustled on her end. "It's signed, ma'am. Your name and signature are right here." I hung up before she finished. The spoon slipped from my hand, clinking against the counter, scattering coffee on the white tile. My house, the home my husband and I built 40 years ago, was being sold, and the person selling it was my own son. I stood there for a long time, staring at the framed photo of Marcus on the mantel. He was 6 years old in that picture gap-toothed, holding the baseball bat his father had given him. "Always take care of what's yours," his daddy had said. Apparently, he'd learned the opposite. I felt something inside me tighten, not anger, yet not even pain, just disbelief so complete it felt like silence. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, the old oak table, the curtains I'd sewn myself. Everything smelled like home lemon polish, old books, faint traces of my late husband's aftershave. This was the house where I raised my boy, where I buried my husband, where I kept every birthday card, every bill paid by hand. And Marcus, my only child, was trying to sell it like a used car. The shock burned through me, slow and deep. How long had he planned this? How many lies had he told while sitting across from me at dinner, smiling, asking if I'd taken my blood pressure pills? When had my own child started treating me like a signature to forge? My knees nearly gave out as I sat at the kitchen table, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the sun kept rising, washing my porch in gold, but inside, everything turned cold. I'd given Marcus everything, my savings, my years, my forgiveness. Now he wanted my walls, my floors, my roof. I took a breath and whispered to no one, "You picked the wrong mother to fool." It wasn't rage that filled me then. It was resolve, cold, steady, unshakable. Because if Marcus thought I was too old, too soft, too blind to fight back, he was about to learn just how wrong a son could be. When people talk about motherhood, they like to use words like devotion, patience, sacrifice. They rarely mention what it feels like when those things are taken for granted. I was 23 when I had Marcus, and back then, the world felt both small and endless. His father, Elijah, built this house with his own hands after coming back from the Navy. We were proud people, not rich, but proud. Every paycheck, every repaired pipe, every meal cooked from leftovers built the walls of this home stronger than brick. After Elijah passed from a heart attack 15 years ago, this house became my whole world, and Marcus my reason to keep breathing. He was my only child, my pride and my burden. From the time he was little, I wanted him to have more than I ever did. I taught at the local high school grading papers until midnight, then spent weekends tutoring just to afford his college tuition. When he wanted to study law, I said yes, even though the thought of those loans nearly crushed me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, writing check after check, telling myself it would be worth it when he became a man I could be proud of. For years, I believed that story. But life doesn't always turn out the way mothers dream it will. Marcus never finished law school. He said it wasn't for him, said professors were unfair, said life was hard. Each excuse chipped away at something I didn't want to name. When he dropped out, I told him to come home and regroup. He promised it would be temporary. That was 6 years ago. Since then, he's lived in the guest room down the hall, sleeping until noon, claiming to look for work, always waiting for a better opportunity. I told myself he was just lost. I told myself love meant giving second chances. But second chances can turn into chains if you're not careful. Last year, he showed up with a new woman, Tanya, a young, sharp realtor, who looked at my house like it was a business deal. She smiled too much and spoke too sweetly. "This place has real value, Mrs. Harris," she'd said, running her eyes along the crown molding like she was assessing inventory. "Homes like this don't stay on the market long. I remember the chill that went through me then, but I brushed it off because Marcus laughed and said, "She's just helping me understand the housing market, Mom." And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that beneath the laziness and the charm, there was still the boy who used to hug me after school, smelling like grass and chalk dust, the boy who cried when his father died. Hope is a dangerous thing for mothers. It makes us blind to the truth standing right in front of us. When Tanya started coming around more, I noticed how Marcus changed. He spoke faster, more confident, like a man who'd suddenly discovered ambition. But his eyes, those same brown eyes that used to light up at Christmas, had turned cold. He started asking strange questions. "Mom, where do you keep the property tax papers? Do you know where the deed is? Wouldn't it be easier if I handled the bills?" At first, I was flattered, then uneasy. Then something darker began to grow, a feeling that my love had turned into his weapon. I remember Elijah's voice from years ago, deep and steady. "Claudine, never let anyone, even your own blood, take what's yours." I hadn't thought about that in a long time, but standing in my kitchen after that phone call from the bank, I realized my husband's warning had come true. My own son wasn't lost anymore. He'd found a purpose, and that purpose was stealing from me. The first real crack appeared one quiet evening in early spring. The air was soft and damp, the kind of Georgia night that carries the smell of rain even when the sky is clear. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard Marcus's voice drift up from the kitchen. His tone was low, conspiratorial, the kind of voice people use when they're hiding something. "Don't worry, babe," he said, his words clipped. "She'll never notice. Everything's under control. The deed's still in the family name." I stopped folding. My heart thudded once hard. I leaned closer to the railing, careful not to make a sound. "Once we sell it?" Tanya replied, her voice sharp and impatient. "We can start over somewhere better. You keep talking, but I need action, Marcus." He laughed, nervous but confident. "Trust me, it's done. She still thinks the papers are in the safe." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the sound of my own pulse louder than their voices. When I finally stepped back, my hands were shaking. The next morning over breakfast, I asked, "What were you talking about last night?" Marcus didn't look up from his phone. "Just work stuff," he said easily. "You wouldn't understand. Tanya's helping a client." "A client," I repeated. "You don't have a job, Marcus." His smile froze for half a second, then softened. "I mean her client, Mom. You always twist things." He laughed it off, poured himself coffee, and changed the subject. I told myself to let it go. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe I was tired. But the lie stuck in my throat like a splinter. A few days later, Tanya came by again, unannounced as always, smelling of expensive perfume. She brought dinner this time, takeout in shiny white boxes, and sat at my table as if she'd always belonged there. "You've got such a beautiful home, Mrs. Harris," she said sweetly, eyes scanning the crown, molding the antique china cabinet. "Do you ever think about downsizing? Something easier to manage?" Marcus chuckled. "See, Tanya's practical. She just worries about you, Mom." I smiled, but my hands were tight around the edge of my plate. "That's thoughtful," I said, "but I'm not ready to leave my home. Not now, not ever." Tanya exchanged a look with Marcus, small but sharp as a knife glinting in sunlight. That night after they left, I sat alone in the living room. The clock ticked softly. The walls seemed to listen with me. Every creak, every rustle made me tense. I realized that suspicion is not a sudden thing. It's a slow invasion, like water finding cracks in a wall. Over the next week, Marcus grew more attentive. He brought me coffee in the mornings, offered to help pay bills, asked again where the deed was kept. He said it like a joke, but I heard the strain underneath. I remembered the night he was born, how I'd held him against my chest, small and helpless, promising him the world. Now, decades later, he sat across from me asking about the papers to sell that very promise. The day came when I found him near my office drawer, pretending to look for batteries. The drawer where I kept the property tax receipts was slightly open. "What are you doing in there?" I asked, voice calm but firm. "Looking for a pen," he said too quickly, his smile too wide. He slipped out before I could say another word. That night, I locked my office door for the first time in my life. Still, sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing his voice in my head, whispering through the shadows. "She'll never notice." But I had noticed. and I wasn't about to let him learn how wrong he was the easy way. 2 weeks later, the storm broke. It was a Friday afternoon when I went into town for groceries and to drop off my church donation check. I was standing at the register when the teller, Miss Jenkins, a woman I'd known for 30 years, gave me a strange look. "Mrs. Harris," she said gently, "are you sure you still want your mail forwarded to the downtown address?" I frowned. "What address?" "Oh," she said, shuffling papers, "the one listed on the transfer documents for your property. The system shows a change of address tied to your deed file." My stomach dropped. "What transfer documents?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the computer screen. "It looks like your son handled it, ma'am. Everything's notarized." I felt my pulse in my ears. The world narrowed to the sound of the printer clicking and the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I asked for a copy of whatever she had signed what she needed and walked out gripping the papers like they were burning my skin. In my car, I flipped through the stack. There it was, a full deed transfer authorization, my name forged in a perfect imitation, the signature looped just slightly tighter than mine. I stared at it, unable to breathe for a moment. My own child, my son, had stolen my name. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was intimate, surgical. I drove home in silence, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, each mile an echo of disbelief. The magnolias along the road blurred past white petals flashing like ghosts. When I reached the driveway, I saw Marcus's car parked crooked Tanya's bright red convertible beside it. Through the window, I could see them in the living room laughing champagne glasses on the coffee table. The image made my chest ache with something heavier than anger. I didn't walk in right away. I stood on the porch, invisible behind the curtain, listening. "It's done," Tanya said, her voice full of triumph. "The buyers will close by next week. Once the funds clear, we're free." "Finally," Marcus said, clinking his glass against hers. "You have no idea what a relief it is to get that burden off my back." "Burden," she teased. "You mean your mother?" He laughed, a low, cruel sound that didn't belong to the boy I'd raised. "She'll be fine," he said. "The state will take care of her. Maybe she'll get one of those little apartments for seniors. She'll probably like it. Less to clean." Tanya giggled. "You're terrible." "Realistic," he corrected. "She had her time. This house is ours now." My hands trembled on the doorknob. Something inside me cracked, not just the trust, but the illusion that love could fix everything. I wanted to storm in to scream, to shatter their smug faces with truth. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back, breathing slow, steady, deliberate. They didn't know I was there. And that ignorance was going to be my weapon. I walked quietly around the house, through the back door, into my study. I pulled out a locked box from under the desk, a box Marcus had never known about. Inside were my husband's old legal files, documents from his Navy pension, our insurance, and most importantly, the deed to this house. The real deed. Elijah had made sure of it years ago after his first stroke. He'd insisted on securing a duplicate filed under his trust, with ownership automatically transferring to me, and then to the trust itself, not to any individual heir. The house wasn't mine alone. It belonged to Elijah Harris Trust, protected by state law, which meant that whatever Marcus forged, whatever Tanya planned, wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. I sat back in my chair, heart still pounding, but for the first time that day, I smiled. The betrayal was real. Yes, but so was the trap they'd walked into. And I was done playing the helpless mother. It was time to remind my son, who taught him everything he knew. That night, I didn't sleep. The ceiling fan turned slow circles above me, stirring the heavy air, while my mind built plans out of anger and precision. I'd spent too many years teaching others how to think critically, how to gather proof before making claims. I wasn't about to start shouting without ammunition. Marcus had his girlfriend, his forged papers, his arrogance. I had experience, patience, and the truth. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. Denise Walton, one of my former students and now a real estate attorney in Atlanta. She'd written me a Christmas card last year, thanking me for teaching her how to read between the lines. When she picked up, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Mrs. Harris, it's been ages. Are you okay?" "Not quite," I said. "I think my son is trying to sell my house." Silence. Then, "Come again?" I told her everything from the phone call about the transfer to the forged documents. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. "Do not confront him yet," she said firmly. "Send me photos of those documents. Every page. I'll check the registry and find out what's been filed." I did exactly that. Within 2 hours, she called back. "He filed a fraudulent quitclaim deed using your signature. It hasn't closed yet, but if it does, it'll get messy. Fortunately, since your property's in trust, he has no legal standing. But we're going to need proof he knew it was fraud." "Proof?" I repeated. "Oh, I'll get you proof." Denise paused. "Mrs. Harris, be careful. He's your son." I looked out the window at Marcus's car, still in the driveway, the engine idling like he was preparing to leave again to pretend to have somewhere important to be. "He used to be," I said quietly. "Now he's a thief with my blood." After hanging up, I walked into the kitchen where Marcus sat scrolling on his phone. "Morning, baby," I said sweetly, pouring coffee. He didn't look up. "Morning. You and Tanya have plans tonight." "Yeah, we might drive out to see some properties," he said easily. "You know, just browsing." "That's nice," I replied, smiling as if I believed him. "Make sure you take my old camera, the one with the long lens. You know it's good for details." He shrugged. "Sure, I knew he'd forget. That was the point." I'd already taken out the memory card and replaced it with a fresh one ready for my own use. That afternoon, I visited the county clerk's office. I smiled politely at the clerk and requested certified copies of the fraudulent deed Marcus had filed. The clerk didn't blink. She simply printed and stamped them, sealing each page. "Will you be contesting the sale?" she asked kindly. "Eventually," I said, tucking them into my purse. "But first, I plan to let them finish their performance." When I returned home, the house was quiet. Marcus and Tanya were gone just as I expected. I checked the safe, still locked to the fake documents, still where I'd left them months ago. I turned on the old camcorder from my church events, positioned it near the bookshelf facing the front door, and tested the recording angle with my phone. The image was crisp, time-stamped undeniable. Denise had told me not to provoke them, but she hadn't said I couldn't document the truth. That evening, as dusk settled over the yard, I heard Tanya's laugh from outside. I stayed in the shadows, listening. "Once it's final, we can flip it fast," she said. "The buyer's already interested." "Easy profit." "And Mom," Marcus asked, his voice low. "She'll just think the bank made a mistake. Old people never check records until it's too late." I pressed record on my phone. Their voices came through the open window, clear as day. Tanya giggled again. "She raised you well, baby. Too bad she never taught you to stop giving everything away." "She won't even know until we're gone," Marcus said. "By the time she figures it out, the deed'll be signed, the check cashed." "And where will that check go?" Tanya asked. Marcus laughed. "To our new start." I held my phone steady, heartbreaking, but hands strong. Every word was evidence. Every laugh a nail in their own coffin. When the door closed behind them, I whispered into the quiet. "You're right, Marcus. I did raise you well, but I also taught you what happens when you lie." By Sunday morning, I was done being a victim in my own house. The woman who once cried into her coffee over broken promises was gone. What stood in her place was a mother armed with patience, precision, and a plan. I spent the day creating what my late husband used to call a truth net, a setup so clean, so quiet, that every liar eventually walks into it thinking it was his own idea. I started with small adjustments. I left Marcus's favorite mug on the kitchen counter with a folded note tucked inside that read, "Bank called again about paperwork. Please handle it soon." It was bait just enough to make him think his scheme was working, just enough to keep him overconfident. Then I made my next call to Pastor James, who ran the community outreach office where I'd volunteered for decades. "Pastor," I said gently, "I need a favor that requires discretion." He chuckled. "You've never asked for anything in 30 years, Claudine. What's going on?" "Just say you might need to stop by Thursday evening to pick up donation receipts," I told him. "I want you to witness something that may concern the law." There was a pause. "Are you in danger?" "No," I said, smiling, though my hand trembled slightly. "But someone else might be in a legal sense." He agreed without asking further. "People who've known you through storms don't need explanations." That night, I moved the house cameras. One in the living room, one by the front door, and one in my study, each carefully angled, each recording directly to the cloud through the new account Denise had helped me set up. The footage would be secure, time-stamped, irrefutable. Marcus didn't notice a thing. He'd spent the weekend pacing, muttering about finalizing things. Tanya texted him constantly, her voice echoing through the hall in bursts of laughter and frustration. I watched silent, polite, even made them dinner. I played the role of the trusting, tired mother so well I almost believed it myself. When he thanked me that night, saying, "You're too good to me, Mom," I smiled softly and replied, "That's what mothers do." But behind that smile, I'd already packed a folder labeled Evidence Marcus Harris Fraud, Forgery, Attempted Property Theft. Denise had reviewed my recordings and the certified deed copies that morning. "He's walking straight into a felony," she said. "All we need is proof of intent and access." "Oh, he'll give us both," I promised. Wednesday arrived like any other day. I made breakfast, folded laundry, listened to gospel radio. Marcus mentioned casually Tanya's coming by tonight to go over documents. "Might use your office, it's quieter." I nodded, hiding the satisfaction pulsing beneath my calm. "Of course, baby. You know where everything is." He grinned, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're the best." By 6 p.m., the sky darkened into a velvet dusk. I pretended to head out for choir practice, purse over my shoulder sweater, buttoned just enough to look harmless. "Don't wait up," I said at the door. As soon as my car rounded the corner, I parked at the neighbors, turned off the engine, and quietly slipped back through the yard gate. From the shed window, I had a perfect view of the living room. The camera feed on my phone showed the rest. Marcus and Tanya entered my office minutes later, laughing, wine glasses in hand. "So this is it," Tanya said, pulling papers from her bag. "Once you forge the witness signature, we'll upload the scans. The buyer's transferring the deposit by midnight." Marcus sat at my desk, my pen in his hand. "You sure she won't find out?" Tanya smirked. "She's watching her church friends sing 'Remember, you said she falls asleep before 10 anyway.'" Marcus leaned over the papers, carefully signing my name. My full name in a near-perfect imitation he'd probably practiced for weeks. I watched in silence as my son committed his crime, captured by 3 angles, 2 microphones, and the timestamp blinking 7:46 p.m. on my phone screen. When he set the pen down, Tanya kissed him. "Congratulations," she whispered. "You just made us rich." I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from the kind of disbelief that carries both grief and justice. Outside, the porch light flickered once the signal from Pastor James right on time. I whispered to myself, "Let's finish this." Because the house my husband built, the life I protected, and the trust my son shattered were all about to come together in one beautiful, devastating moment of truth. I waited until they started scanning the forged documents. Tanya held up her phone, angling the pages under my desk lamp. Her fingers still glittered from the cheap ring Marcus had bought her last week. "Perfect lighting," she said. "Send it to Mr. Connolly once you're done." Marcus looked nervous for the first time. "What if Mom checks the mail tomorrow?" Tanya rolled her eyes. "Please. She probably thinks PDFs are a new brand of vitamins." He laughed at that, laughed, and that sound hardened something inside me once and for all. I stepped through the back door soft and slow, like I had 1,000 times before after watering my garden. The cameras caught it all. My shoes didn't make a sound on the carpet as I reached the doorway to my study. "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't know much about PDFs, but I do know about felonies." The reaction was almost cinematic. Tanya jumped the phone, clattering to the floor. Marcus spun around, the color draining from his face faster than the blood could catch up. "Mom," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "This is my house, Marcus." A better question would be, what are you doing in my office signing my name to a crime? Tanya tried to collect herself, straightening her blouse. "Mrs. Harris, this isn't what it looks like." "Oh, sweetheart," I interrupted, voice sharp as glass. "You might want to save that line for the police." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, pressing a single button. On the bookshelf television above the desk, the feed from my hidden cameras appeared. Marcus and Tanya caught from 3 angles, laughing, forging, plotting. The room filled with the sound of their own voices. "She'll never know. She's watching her church friends sing." Marcus's face went slack. "Mom." "Don't call me that," I said quietly. "You don't get to use that word tonight." Tanya stepped back toward the door. "We can fix this," she whispered. "We'll delete everything." "Already uploaded to the cloud, darling," I said. 3 lawyers and 1 detective have copies. Don't worry, I'm organized. Marcus's voice broke into a desperate whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You just what I said, cutting him off. You just wanted money, a shortcut. You think because I'm old, I'd die quietly while you cashed the check. The tremor in my voice wasn't weakness, it was fury restrained by dignity. I taught you how to read Marcus, how to look people in the eye when you tell the truth. And now you're standing in the house your father built using my pen to steal from me. He took a step forward, eyes wet. Mom, please, I can explain. No, I said, holding up a hand. You've talked enough. Sit down. Tanya whispered Marcus, let's go. But before she could reach the door, the sound of footsteps filled the hallway. Pastor James appeared steady and quiet, his phone in hand, already recording. Evening, he said. Everything all right here, Sister Claudine? Better than it's been in a long while, I said softly. Marcus stared at him, jaw tight. You set me up? No, I replied. You set yourself up. I just turned on the light so you could see it. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. You don't understand. I had debts, real ones. Those people didn't raise you, I said. Didn't stay up nights sewing uniforms so you could play baseball. Didn't pay your tuition when you flunked out twice. I did. And this, I gestured to the papers. This is how you repay love. He sank into the chair, face buried in his hands. Tanya edged toward the door again, but Pastor James stepped aside, blocking her way. I'd stay, he said calmly. The sheriff's already on his way. Mrs. Harris made sure of that. For a moment, the room was nothing but the ticking clock and Marcus's ragged breathing. I watched my son fall apart piece by piece, the arrogance, the excuses, the false charm, all peeling away until what remained was a frightened man who'd mistaken kindness for weakness. I didn't want to do this to you, he whispered. Then why did you? I asked. He didn't answer. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, red lights flashing faintly against the curtains. I stood beside the desk, looking at the forged papers, the empty champagne glasses, the ghost of my husband's portrait hanging above it all. You thought I'd lost everything, Marcus, I said quietly. But what you forgot is that I still have my name. And tonight, you gave me back my power. The knock on the door came soft at first, then firm and measured the way lawmen do when they already know what they're walking into. Pastor James opened it, his face solemn but calm. 2 deputies stepped inside, one young and sharp-eyed, the other older, with a kind expression that made the room's tension almost bearable. The older one tipped his hat. Evening, ma'am. Sheriff Daniels. We received a call about a forged property transfer. Is this the residence of Mrs. Claudine Harris? Yes, sir, I said, voice steady. And this is my son Marcus Harris and his associate. Marcus looked up, eyes wide and wet. Mom, please don't do this. The younger deputy's gaze flicked from him to the documents on the desk, then to the video feed still frozen on the screen behind him, Marcus's hand holding my pen, Tanya's smile beside him. Ma'am, the deputy said we'll need to secure those recordings and take statements. I nodded already, handing over the USB drives Denise had prepared. Everything you need is right here, recordings, timestamps, certified deed copies, and my lawyer's card. Tanya's voice cracked. You can't arrest us for a misunderstanding. Sheriff Daniels didn't even blink. Miss, you're free to explain it to the judge, but I've seen enough forged signatures in my day to know this wasn't no accident. Marcus stood up, suddenly, voice breaking. It's my mother's fault. She hoards money. She made me desperate. The words sliced deeper than I expected, but I didn't flinch. No, Marcus, I said quietly. I gave you every chance. What you call hoarding was me saving the home your father built so you'd have somewhere to come back to. You just decided you wanted the deed, not the door. He opened his mouth again, but Sheriff Daniels lifted a hand. That's enough, son. You have the right to remain silent. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the room, sharp and final. Tanya burst into tears, stepping back like she could cry her way out of consequence. I didn't sign anything, she insisted. I was just helping. The deputy retrieved her fingerprints from the glass she'd been holding, pressing it carefully into a bag. Helping's one thing, he said. Conspiring's another. When they led them both toward the door, Marcus turned, once eyes meeting mine. You don't understand. He whispered, his voice small, almost childlike again. For 1 second, I saw the boy. He used to be the one who used to tug my sleeve in church, the one who cried when his father died. I understand perfectly, I said softly, and I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase justice. He lowered his head as they walked him out into the flashing red lights. The night air was cool, clean, final. Tanya shouted something about lawyers, her words drowned by the closing car door. I stood at the doorway until the lights disappeared down the street. Pastor James placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You did what you had to, Sister Claudine. God saw everything. I know, I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. And he knows this isn't vengeance. It's protection. After he left, the house felt impossibly still. I walked back to my study. The scent of ink and paper lingered in the air along with something else, peace. Real peace. On the desk sat the framed photo of Elijah holding baby Marcus, both of them smiling, sunlight behind them. I traced my fingers along the frame, whispering, I tried Eli. I really did. The next morning, Denise called. They're booked, she said. Forgery, attempted fraud, conspiracy. You won't have to testify, they have everything on record. I thanked her quietly. What happens next? Court'll handle it. But Mrs. Harris, her tone softened. You taught him integrity once. Sometimes the world has to teach the rest. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table watching sunlight spill across the floorboards Elijah had laid by hand. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt something deeper, relief tangled with mourning. Because justice doesn't always come clean. It comes with memories that ache like bruises. That afternoon, the neighborhood kids rode their bikes past my porch, their laughter cutting through the silence. I smiled, finally taking a sip of the coffee that had gone cold the day before. For the first time in years, it didn't taste bitter. The house was mine again, safe, sacred, unshaken. But the cost of keeping it would echo for the rest of my life. 2 months later, I sat in the Fulton County Courthouse beneath a ceiling fan that creaked like an old hymn. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. I wore my best navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Elijah's funeral, the same one I'd saved for moments that demanded quiet strength. Denise sat beside me, her pen poised, her voice calm as stone. Across the aisle, Marcus sat in a wrinkled gray suit, wrists free but spirit shackled. Tanya was 2 seats away, all makeup and regret, pretending not to tremble. The trial had moved faster than anyone expected. The evidence was airtight, the recordings undeniable. When the judge called my name, the courtroom fell still. Mrs. Claudine Harris, he said, his voice deep deliberate. You may approach the stand. I did, my heels echoing softly against the tile. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. Denise began the questioning gently. Mrs. Harris, could you tell the court when you first discovered your son's actions? I told them about the phone call from the bank, the forged signature, the champagne laughter echoing through my walls. I kept my tone factual, not emotional. Denise had warned me, let the evidence speak. Let the calmness cut deeper than anger. Then came the playback, the video from my study. The courtroom watched in complete silence as Marcus's image flickered across the screen, his voice saying, she'll never know. She's watching her church friends sing. Tanya's laugh filled the air like poison, followed by the unmistakable sound of my pen scratching across stolen paper. Even the bailiff's face changed disbelief, giving way to disgust. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Harris, is this your voice? Marcus hesitated, then whispered, Yes, Your Honor. And these are your words, your actions. Yes. Denise stood, her tone precise. No further questions, Your Honor. The prosecutor didn't need to say much. The recordings, timestamps, and certified deed copies were enough. Tanya's lawyer tried to argue coercion, that she had been manipulated by Marcus, but the judge wasn't swayed. Miss Bell, he said flatly, you appear to have been a willing participant in this fraud. This court finds your plea for ignorance unconvincing. When it came time for the sentencing, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Marcus looked over at me, once his eyes hollow. I didn't look away. The judge adjusted his glasses, voice grave. Mr. Harris, this court finds you guilty of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of protected property. You are sentenced to 8 years in state custody with the possibility of parole after 5. Miss Bell, you are sentenced to 4 years for conspiracy to defraud. Tanya gasped, turning to Marcus. You said we'd walk away clean. He didn't answer. The deputies moved in the handcuffs, clicking like punctuation marks on a story that had gone too far. The judge glanced toward me. Mrs. Harris, you've shown extraordinary restraint and intelligence in protecting both your property and your dignity. The court extends its respect. I nodded faintly. Thank you, Your Honor. When they led Marcus away, he turned once more. For a split second, I saw not the man who'd betrayed me, but the boy who used to sleep in a race car bed and cry when thunder scared him. I'm sorry, Mama, he said quietly, voice shaking. I closed my eyes. I know I whispered. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited local news, hungry for a headline. Elderly woman outsmarts her own son's fraud scheme. One of them said. Cameras flashed as I stepped into the sunlight. Denise shielded me with her arm, muttering, Smile, Mrs. Harris. You just won. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. I stopped on the courthouse steps and looked out at the skyline, tall, glittering buildings rising against the pale Georgia sky. Somewhere behind those windows, people were probably gossiping about greed and betrayal, but I didn't care. What mattered was the truth. My name was still mine. My home still stood, and my husband's legacy hadn't been stolen. That evening when I got home, I opened all the windows. The breeze smelled like magnolia and rain. I poured a glass of sweet tea, sat by Elijah's photo, and said softly, Justice came love. It wasn't pretty, but it was true. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't ask permission to stay. The weeks that followed the sentencing felt both too quiet and too loud. Reporters stopped calling, the neighbors stopped whispering, but the silence in my house had its own echo. Each creak of the floorboard reminded me that my son's footsteps no longer lived here. The peace was real, but it came with a hollow center, like breathing after a storm that took half the roof. I'd walk into the kitchen and still expect to see Marcus sitting there half awake, pretending to read job listings while scrolling his phone. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the wall clock Elijah had fixed 30 years ago. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was realizing how long I'd ignored it. For years, I'd called his failures bad luck. I'd covered his debts, made excuses, let hope rewrite history. Hope, I realized, is a mother's cruelest gift. It blinds you until the fall is too steep to stop. A week after the trial, I got a letter from Marcus, handwritten. No envelope, just the prison stamp across the top. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I'm sorry. I thought I was fixing things. I thought if I could pay off my debts, you'd finally see me as a man again. I lost myself. I hope someday you can remember who I used to be. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in Elijah's Bible between Psalms and Proverbs, where mercy meets wisdom. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means refusing to let pain rot your soul. The community found out, of course. Pastor James called me one Sunday morning before service. They all know Sister Claudine. Folks been talking about your strength. You want me to keep them quiet? No, I told him. Let them talk. Maybe someone will learn something about the difference between love and blindness. When I walked into church that day, people turned murmuring, smiling gently. Some hugged me. Others just nodded with that respectful kind of silence reserved for survivors. During service, Pastor James spoke about stewardship, not just of money or property, but of truth. Sometimes he said, looking right at me, the hardest thing God ever asks of us is to stand still while he removes what was poisoning us. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sunset burn gold over the magnolia trees. My neighbor, old Mr. Latham, shuffled over with 2 mugs of cocoa. Heard the boys doing time, he said softly. That's a hard thing. It is, I replied. He nodded. But hard doesn't mean wrong. I smiled faintly. No, it doesn't. In the following weeks, Tanya's mother came by unannounced, a short woman in a church dress clutching her purse like it held her shame. I wanted to apologize, she said. My daughter, she got caught up with bad folks, bad choices. You didn't deserve any of this. I studied her for a moment and saw the same exhaustion that lived in my own mirror. We both raised children who thought love meant taking, I said gently. Let's pray they learn what it means to give. She nodded, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. We didn't hug. We just stood there, 2 mothers with too much history between us. One afternoon, I drove out to Elijah's grave. The grass had grown tall, the air thick with summer. I knelt and brushed away the leaves. "He's in prison, Eli," I whispered. "Our son. The boy you taught to throw a baseball, the boy you said would carry your name with pride." My throat tightened, but I made sure he didn't carry your shame. The wind stirred the trees' gentle approving. I stayed there a while, talking to the silence until it felt less like loss and more like release. Back home, I started putting the house in order again. I replaced the locks, repainted the study, boxed up the reminders of chaos. But I left one thing untouched: the chair where Marcus used to sit as a boy, spinning his toy cars along the armrest. Not as a shrine, as a lesson. Because every scar in this house told a story not of what was broken, but of what survived. And though I was older, though the world had taken more than it gave, I still had what mattered most: my name, my peace, and the knowledge that sometimes love's last act is saying no and letting the truth do its work. By autumn, the air turned soft again, and so did I. The courthouse calls stopped, the reporters forgot, and the town's gossip found new mouths to feed. What remained was quiet, the kind that didn't ache anymore. I filled it with the small, ordinary things I'd once taken for granted: coffee brewed before sunrise gospel, humming low in the kitchen, the front door creaking open to let in the morning breeze. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted by disappointment. It felt alive again. But healing isn't just silence after noise, it's learning how to speak to yourself kindly again. Some mornings I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror and see a woman who looked older than her years but steadier than her past. A woman who'd built something that couldn't be stolen because it lived inside her. Denise still called once a week, checking in like a daughter might. "You know, Mrs. Harris," she said one afternoon, "your story made the local news network's segment on elder justice. They're using it to educate people about financial exploitation." I laughed softly. Imagine that, me teaching again, just in a different classroom. She smiled through the phone. "You always were the best teacher I ever had." After we hung up, I drove into town and stopped by the senior center, the one where I used to volunteer before all the chaos began. The director, Miss Evelyn, hugged me tight. "You ready to come back to work?" "I think I am," I said. "But this time I want to start something new." By November, the Harris Trust Foundation for Senior Protection was born, a small legal aid fund named not after the pain Marcus caused, but after the lesson it taught me. Denise handled the paperwork. Pastor James donated the first check. The foundation's mission was simple: to help elders recognize the difference between love and manipulation before it cost them everything. Every week, I'd sit with women my age, some widowed, some alone, all carrying quiet heartbreaks. They'd tell me stories about their sons pawning jewelry, their daughters borrowing savings that never came back. I listened. I nodded, and when they asked how I found the strength, I'd tell them the truth. Strength isn't about fighting harder. It's about knowing when to stop fighting for someone who stopped fighting for you. One afternoon, a woman named Irene pressed my hand and said, "I wish I'd had your courage." I shook my head. "You do. You just haven't used it yet." At night, when the work was done, I'd sit on the porch watching the stars blink over the magnolia trees, the same trees Elijah planted decades ago. Sometimes I'd think of Marcus, wonder if the prison meals reminded him of my Sunday stews, or if the nights were long enough for him to think about what love had cost him. I never wrote back after his first letter, but I prayed for him every morning. Not for release, but for awakening. Christmas came quietly that year. No guests, no noise, just me, a candle, and the old record player humming Silent Night. I poured 2 cups of cocoa, one for me, one for Elijah's memory, and whispered, "We made it through love." The house still stands, so do I. And for a moment, the air around me felt full, like Elijah was right there, smiling in the dim light. The next morning, I found another letter from Marcus waiting in my mailbox. This one was shorter, written in smaller handwriting. "Mom, I've been taking classes. Financial literacy, anger management, faith counseling. I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm trying to be someone worth forgiving." I held that letter to my chest and whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." Healing doesn't mean the wound never existed. It means it no longer controls the way you move. By the time spring came again, the azaleas bloomed along the walkway Elijah had built, and my home felt light for the first time in years. I opened all the windows, let sunlight touch every corner, and finally understood something. I wish I'd learned sooner. Sometimes justice isn't just what the court gives you, it's the peace you learn to live in after you stop waiting for anyone else to bring it back. It's been 2 years since the night my son tried to sell my home, and life has found a quieter rhythm, one I didn't know I could love again. The house stands steady, painted soft cream, now the same color Elijah always wanted. The magnolias still bloom outside the window, and sometimes when the evening wind blows through them, it sounds like laughter, the kind that belongs to peace, not illusion. I still keep Marcus's first and second letters in Elijah's Bible. They've grown worn at the edges, folded and refolded so many times that the creases look like veins. I've come to see them not as apologies, but as mile markers, proof that even broken things can learn direction again. Denise says he's up for parole soon, that he's been attending chapel regularly and helping other inmates write letters to their families. I don't know if I'm ready to see him, but I pray he's ready to see himself. Last week, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal came to interview me about the foundation. She was young, bright-eyed, full of questions. "Mrs. Harris," she asked if you could go back before the betrayal, before the court. What would you change? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. I'd listen to silence sooner, I said. When love turns into obligation, the silence between words becomes warning. Mothers hear it first, we just pretend not to. The article ran on a Sunday. The headline read, "She lost everything but her name and built justice instead." I didn't recognize myself in the photograph standing in front of the house with my silver hair pinned back, smiling gently into the camera, but I recognized the strength in my eyes. That part was mine. That part had survived. The Harris Trust Foundation now helps over 70 seniors a year, people like Miss Irene, who finally cut ties with her manipulative nephew, or Mr. Latham's sister, who stopped her daughter from liquidating her life insurance. Every time I sign the checks for legal aid, I think about the night Marcus signed his name on a lie. There's symmetry in that his forgery became my purpose. One morning, as I was sorting through mail at the kitchen table, a plain white envelope slid from the pile. The handwriting was familiar, Marcus's smaller, now humbler. Inside was a simple note, "Parole granted. I understand if you don't want contact, but thank you for saving me from myself." I sat there a long while, sunlight creeping across the table. There was no anger left, no ache, just a quiet, unshakable truth. Love doesn't end when it breaks, it changes shape. I wrote back the next day, 3 lines only. "You're still my son, just not the same one who left. Come home when you've learned to be new." I don't know if he'll take me up on it. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But the peace doesn't depend on that anymore. The healing isn't conditional. That Sunday, Pastor James invited me to speak at the church's senior luncheon. The room was full, gray hair laughter and the smell of collard greens. When I stepped to the microphone, I looked out at faces that had known love and loss in equal measure. Some of you know my story I began, but this isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about boundaries, about learning that forgiveness doesn't mean opening your door to the same storm twice. It means building a roof strong enough to stand under the next one. They nodded, some teary-eyed others smiling through recognition. I continued, "We spend so much of our lives giving money, time, mercy. But wisdom is knowing when to stop giving to someone who only takes. Justice isn't vengeance, it's order restored." When I stepped down, a woman about my age grabbed my hand and whispered, "You gave us courage, Claudine." I smiled, feeling Elijah's presence like a warm breeze against my shoulder. "No, sister," I said softly. "We already had courage. We just needed to see it wasn't too late to use it." That night, I came home and stood on my porch, looking out at the quiet street, the same one where Marcus once parked his car before walking inside to betray me. The same one I now watched children ride bikes down free and loud. The porch light flickered once, catching the edges of the Harris nameplate on the mailbox. It gleamed gold in the dusk. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your chest and empties the past. "We're okay, Elijah," I whispered. "Our house is safe. Our name is clean. And our story, well, it's still being written." Then I turned off the light, stepped inside, and let the door close gently behind me. This time, not as a barrier, but as a seal of peace.